I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today we're driving the Alfa Romeo Giulia. Now, life doesn't get much better than a small luxury sedan with a decently powerful engine up front and rear-wheel drive at the back, and that's exactly what we're dealing with here. However, although most of the Giulia chatter has been about the Quadrifoglio model, which is the one with the big Ferrari-derived V6 that competes with cars like the BMW M3, this is actually a Giulia at the other end of the scale. This is what you see and what you get if you only want to spend $60,000 on a small Alfa Romeo sedan. So even at the base model level, can the Giulia really give you some of that classic Alfa Romeo verve that the brand is famous for? Well, that's what we're going to be checking out today. And we're also going to be talking about whether the Giulia is really a realistic alternative to something safe like an Audi A4 or a BMW 3 Series. Is this truly an Alfa you can live with every day? Well, let's jump inside and start finding out. One of the ways the Giulia is least like an Alfa Romeo is the interior. And that's because for as long as anyone can remember, Italian cars have often had really sexy interiors, but with crap ergonomics. That's not the case with the Giulia. It has a really attractive and functional interior, and actually everything is where you expect it. Plus, it's pretty comfortable. It doesn't have weird seats with short squabs like Alfas of old. It's bizarrely Germanic, in fact. So you sit in comfy seats with a nice sort of length to them. They're well shaped. They're big enough to support different body types. The only issue is that on this base model Giulia, the leather quality isn't very good. The Super and Veloce models, which sit higher than this and underneath the Quadrifoglio, upgrade to a much nicer quality of leather. The driving position is superb though. It's a classic rear-wheel drive driving position with your legs stretched right out in front of you, and you sit really, really low in this car. So it feels sporty from the word go. Plus, the steering wheel really adds to that aura of sportiness as well, especially because it's got one of the coolest features I've ever seen, which is the start-stop button being on the steering wheel, just like a supercar. I can't think of any other mainstream car in recent history or even longer than that that's put a start button on the wheel itself. Very, very cool. Plus, it feels great to hold on to. Has a really excellent tactile touch in metal paddle shifters sitting behind it that look and feel really nice. It's got a real defined click to it. Cool looking gauges as well, although you can't get a fully digital gauge cluster like you can on, say, the Audi A4. What you do get though on every Giulia delivered in Australia is an 8.8 inch color infotainment screen over here. It's not a touchscreen even though it looks like one. Instead it's controlled through a sort of iDrive MMI style rotary controller between the seats. The system works okay. It's definitely better than FCA's other factory systems. Alfa Romeo gets its own software. It's a little bit slow and laggy. That said, everything kind of works fairly logically and I didn't have any major complaints, apart from the fact that the Giulia still doesn't have CarPlay or Android Auto in Australia. In some other markets it does. They say it'll be added here later. Quality is a bit of a mixed bag inside the Giulia, however. It's just little details that Alfa Romeo haven't quite nailed compared to cars that are super solid like an Audi A4 or a BMW 3 Series. It's just things like some of the controls just kind of move around in their sockets a bit, and there's a few sort of metallic rattles that are starting to come through in this particular test car, although this does have 10,000 hard kilometers on the clock and press cars do get driven really hard. It's just not as solid and upmarket feeling ultimately inside than some of this car's rivals. But of course, that's not what an Alfa Romeo is really all about. It's how it drives. So if it drives really well, we can probably forgive that. And we'll talk about that in a minute. The practicality is actually okay, which is another standout for an Alfa Romeo. So 2 big cup holders ahead of the shifter, a decent central box with a USB port, plus another USB up here. Even the glove box fits the owner's manual. And the door bins, although they're small, you can just jam a medium-sized water bottle into them. So what's life like in the back of the Alfa Giulia? Well, firstly, it isn't impossible to fit a child seat because the doors open relatively wide. They close with a reassuring thunk. And then there are actually Isofix points on both outboard seats that have clever little covers so you can't lose it, and you can slide the base of the seat in there really easily. But what's life like for people that are a little bit bigger than a baby? Well, it's actually livable for adults, if not the biggest in the class. So for me at 6 foot, I've got decent headroom, although this car doesn't have the optional panoramic sunroof. Legroom's okay. and tow room sitting behind myself is just average, but I do have the driver's seat at its lowest possible setting. If you want a family Alfa Romeo with quite a bit more room in the back, then you should look at the new Stelvio SUV, which is based on the same underpinnings as the Giulia. However, if you want a sedan which has a much more roomy back seat, the Audi A4 is the way to go, mostly because that is a front-wheel drive based car, so there's a lot more room for rear legroom. Comfort back here is actually pretty good, and that's because, as you can see, the seat base is inclined upwards, so your legs are supported and the backrest is at a decent angle. Plus, all Giulias come with air vents of the same cool gimbal style as you get up front, and there's even a rear USB port, which is a thing that plenty of cars in this segment still don't have. Additionally, there's a fold-down center armrest with 2 cup holders, which is always nice to see. So all in all, the Giulia's backseat is pretty good. The Giulia has a competitive boot compared to cars like the Audi A4 and the BMW 3 Series. Oh, pressed the wrong button. Been doing that for about a week. Behind the boot, it's got 480 litres of space, although you'll see there's a fairly narrow aperture. So you've only got this much sort of room to actually slot things through. Now, they have thought to include stuff like a little bin off to the side of the boot floor itself. There's not really any underfloor storage, however, there is a net that you can install down there to stop delicate items from moving around, and there's also pulls to lower those rear seats 60-40 as well from right here in the boot. So, what's the Alfa Giulia like to drive? Well, you jump in here behind a really nice steering wheel, great paddle shifters, there's a really good driving position, so your expectations are set pretty high as soon as you jump into the car. And thankfully, the Giulia doesn't let you down. Even in the base model form, it's pretty impressive among these small luxury sedans that it competes with. Among the class, it'd be most similar to the Jaguar XE in that you feel like you're in quite a small, tight, compact rear-wheel drive sedan with really good steering as its main defining feature. Just like the Jaguar, the Alfa's steering really feels alive, and if anything, in the Giulia, it's even quicker and more direct than it is in the XE. If the Jag has heavier steering feel, the Alfa has lighter, and either of those cars sort of feel more dynamic and sportier to drive than the C-Class and the A4 particularly, but also the 3 Series BMW. And I reckon the Giulia, even in base petrol form, would have to challenge the 3 Series for being a dynamic benchmark in the class. However, there are a couple of details to the way the Giulia drives that it doesn't nail. So the ride quality is pretty fidgety, even on these 18s, which are the smallest wheels you can get with the car. It doesn't really like the sort of imperfections that feature prominently on metropolitan roads in Australia, and big bumps can confuse it as well out in the country. However, if you find a smooth bit of road, the Giulia is really quite sublime to drive, with brilliant rear drive dynamics, really sorted handling, lovely steering, and the engine's pretty good too. So the base model and the Super come with a 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol that produces 147 kilowatts of power and 330 newton meters of torque, so a little bit below the standard set by the German rivals in this class, but the engine's not a bad one. It does quite like to be revved out, and it sounds good while doing it as well. Alfa have managed to design a 4-cylinder engine here that sounds, relatively engaging. However, my recommendation would be to step up to the Veloce, which keeps a 2-litre 4-cylinder petrol, but knocks the outputs up to 206 kilowatts of power and 400 newton meters of torque, because you can just feel that the chassis here is so good that it deserves to be exploited by an engine with more power. Now, you can go for the Quadrifoglio if you have lots of money to spend, which uses a far more serious 375 kilowatt V6. If you're after maximum efficiency, there's also a diesel engine available in the Giulia, but if you're after an Alfa Romeo and you want efficiency, I'm not too sure about that. If you want something with maximum frugality, I'd probably look at a 320d BMW. Go for a petrol Giulia is my opinion. Not the quietest car in its class, but refinement isn't a massive problem. And it's quite a fun car to drive. It feels good while you're driving it. It's a stylish interior. Visibility out of the thing isn't actually that bad. But the safety proposition could be a little more impressive. You have to option up things like blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert, which don't feature on this car, nor does adaptive cruise control, but you do get forward collision warning and AEB. So those are my impressions of the most affordable Alfa Romeo Giulia. Even at less than 60 grand, this car is really engaging to drive, which is the main point of buying an Alfa. That said, I'd recommend stepping up to at least the Super, probably the Veloce, to get sexier looks outside, and much better quality leather inside. Stuff that will really make the difference if you'll be driving the car every day. Honestly, if you love driving, you'd be silly to go out and buy an A4 or a C-Class without comparing them to a Giulia or a Jaguar XE. Both this Italian and the Brit bring some passion and enjoyment to an otherwise fairly conservative segment.